Hello there and welcome back to another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm Rafael de Furia, back at it again to talk about life abroad, living abroad as a dual citizen expat. This week, I wanted to do another compare and contrast between Italy and Portugal. Last time we spoke a little bit about the moving process and actually kind of coming to Portugal or coming to Italy, moving to Italy. But in this compare and contrast episode, I would like to focus a little bit more on living here so far. Been here 3 months, and also based on my past visits to Portugal, I can say I have a pretty darn good understanding of what life is like here. And to be able to make that compare and contrast for this episode, there will be plenty more to say. But for the time being, just before we get into the rest of this episode, a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make these episodes possible through Patreon, as well as the one-time donations and the purchase of the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. Of course, the links are rafaeldefuria.com/patreon/support or shop.rafaeldefuria.com. Of course, all of the links will be below here on YouTube. But of course, it is time to get started with this episode. So roll that intro. What's going on with the mic? Just a quick comment question of the week before we get into this. If you're thinking about moving abroad, have you had a debate between two locations? And if so, what are those locations and why? What are the things that you've been looking at? Or if you're already living abroad, where did you move to and why did you move there? What was it that made you pick that place? And what is the quality of life there like now that you're living there versus what you thought it would be like before you ended up there? So let's first talk about one of the most important factors when moving to a new country, how you are going to fund that new life. And this could come in the way of actually having to work or living on retirement, living on your pension. So if you're living on a pension, some of this may not be as relevant to you, but may be worth taking into consideration. We will get into other factors which will be much more relevant to you in just a second. But if you are thinking that you will need to work in one of these countries, it is very important to consider how you will make that living. What I always recommend, and I have plenty of you have heard me say this in prior episodes, that if you have a way of working online, and I've said this even before 2020 and remote working has kind of become the thing that it has, if you can figure out how to make your income online, that will help you to be able to have some of the flexibility. But don't start your online experience of the workplace, of the quote unquote workplace, after you've already moved. Get started before you do that so that you can see if it's possible for you to live on what you're earning, at least roughly to have an idea, and also to see if you can even get through the work to begin with. There are some people who just prefer being in an office. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's totally fine. But if you can figure out a way of at least having a partial income online, that is great, because if you can earn, say, an American or Northern European or Australian, New Zealand income in both Italy or Portugal, you will be living quite comfortably. In both of these countries, it would probably be safe to say that the expendable income at the end of the month is not quite as high as it is in other parts of the world. When you look at Italy versus Portugal, Italians do seem to earn a bit more. However, when it comes to finding a job, this was something I was very surprised about after moving here to Portugal, that I had met a number of Italians who actually came to Portugal for work. Think about that for a second. There's so many people that are under the impression that Portugal is actually the one in the worse off situation, financially speaking, and in some ways that could be true. But my experience of meeting Italians here who were finding work and saying that they are in Portugal because of the work situation and because it was easier for them to figure out work here rather than being in Italy. Like when I asked them about it, they said, no, it's so much better here. I was shocked about that. That was shocking to me. I'm not going to say that's going to be everybody's experience, though. Also, if you do start working in one of these countries, you'll be earning probably what would be the normal wage that people would be earning there, unless you are in a specialist position. And you have to think about what the cost of living is and how far that will go at the end of the month. I would say that in some ways they kind of match up with each other. Like the cost of living matches up with how much you earn at the end of the month in Italy. However, that's not totally true, depending on where you are in the country, especially some of the places that are further out in the countryside or maybe further south where incomes just aren't as high as they are in some of the major cities in the north. But again, this is difficult to say though when it comes to Italy because it really can vary greatly. I mean, the price that you would pay in a city like in the center of Milan versus in some small country town in Puglia, yeah, there's going to be a bit of a difference there. But when it comes to what you earn in Portugal, it doesn't seem as though the euro that you earn here goes as far at the end of the month. But again, it depends on where you live and what your lifestyle is like. It does seem as though, from what I've seen, the cost of apartments can be quite similar to Italy. But again, you're earning a bit less than you would. I mean, you can find, even if you want to purchase, I just saw the other day, you can purchase a one-room ruin here, not far, I think, from Braga for 17,000 euros. So if you want to own property, like you can get into it for pretty cheap. You can also do the same thing in Italy, roughly speaking. But do you want to own a ruin that you have to build up yourself? That's a whole different discussion for a whole different episode. And I've done a couple of those episodes, for example, on the €1 homes and why I wouldn't. Of course, if you're interested in more about that, you can check out the video that I'm going to link up in the corner right here if you're on YouTube. But there are certain things here that I would say actually do feel less expensive than what I was paying in Italy. Without going into specific details, again, this is not supposed to be like, oh, this is X and Y and specific analysis. This is just roughly an overview of what I've been seeing. For what I would spend for food, like going to the supermarket, not going out, we'll get to that in a second. What I would say is that I sometimes can pay here between 1/3 and 1/2 of what I might pay in Italy. I found that shocking, and something that I constantly find myself doing when I go to buy vegetables or go to the supermarket. I constantly have to do like this double take and say, wait, excuse me, how much did you say? When they tell me the price of what I'm supposed to pay for that shopping trip. Like, sorry, excuse me, did you ring that up wrong? Is that correct? Like, is that the real amount? Did you forget something in there? It's like, these are the prices. So that's something that I constantly find myself doing. I can say also, if I were to go to a pastry shop, I have had the same experience there. Pastry seems to be a lot less expensive here. Meat seems to be a bit less expensive here, but the quality of meat here in Portugal does seem to be vastly superior to most of the meat that I have had in Italy. I've mentioned this in past episodes, but also like in Italy, even like when we're talking about going shopping for household items or things that you might use, the costs, again, just like everywhere, can vary widely. Like, for example, where I lived in Rovigo. If you wanted to buy things that were a bit cheaper, you could go to one of the street markets that they had. There were 3 in the week. There was one on Tuesdays, Thursdays, or Wednesdays, I can't remember off the top of my head, and Saturdays in 3 different parts of town. The one on Tuesdays was like the main big market, and that happened on the center street and kind of sprawled out a little bit. And that's where you had the widest selection of stuff as well as the most amount of booths. And if you were looking for household items, that would probably be one of the cheaper options. Or even if you needed like socks or just a couple of shirts or whatever it may be, that would have been one of the cheapest options. But what I can say is at just going to some of the normal shops here, like a store here, not an outdoor market or anything like that. My experience of Portugal has been some of those prices, those lower prices that I would expect in the outdoor markets in a place like Rovigo, I would see those prices in store here. But when we're talking about shopping, I think it's also really important to consider online shopping. And this is an area that, in my opinion, Italy seems to be way ahead, really way ahead of Portugal. You have Amazon Italy, and in Portugal, you use Amazon Spain. You can get Prime in both countries, but in Italy, especially because where I lived in Rovigo, there were fulfillment centers very close by, I would often get things next day, even if it said like 2 days. But here in Portugal, I did try Prime, I did do the trial of that, and I didn't find that I was getting things quite so fast. It was 2 days, 3 days. It's supposed to be 2 days, but a little flexibility in there. And the selection on Amazon Italy was a lot better than what I was finding on Amazon Spain. Also, the price is a little bit better as well. But of course, you have access to the other European stores like Amazon Germany. So there are certain things that I have ordered from Amazon Germany since being here. And can I really say it adds a ton of time to the process? Not exactly, but it would definitely be longer than what I would expect if I were in Italy. Again, shopping from Amazon Italy. Also, because it's a much larger country, of course, there's going to be more infrastructure in place for these types of things anyway. But Portugal is a much smaller country with a much smaller population, so it's not to say that it couldn't work here. And actually, like, I've found that the mail system here has been somewhat reliable and that I've been happy enough with receiving my deliveries. Although one of the biggest differences that I've noticed when it comes to deliveries specifically, they will actually come up to my apartment and deliver it to my door. Whereas in Italy, I had to go down to meet them at the front door of the building. So a little annoying. I've had to do that a couple times here, but they're very pleasant about it. And I've had even some of the delivery people here in Portugal who've met me like halfway up the stairs. And what happened a number of times was in Italy, they would just open the door, literally throw the package in to the building, not to any apartment or whatever, and just leave it on the floor. It's a little bit of a different experience. But also when we're talking about shopping online, again, I found more options for if I needed to order, like, say, mustache wax. Weird thing to think about, but something that for me can become necessary sometimes. In Italy, I had a lot more options to be able to order online. When I looked here in Portugal, the places, either the prices were like way more expensive for these types of things, or they were just completely out of stock. And then, of course, the cost of shipping on top. I mean, there's something definitely to say about paying an annual fee for unlimited fast shipping. For as horrible as I may feel about shopping from there sometimes, as a consumer, it ends up being the easiest option when you have that available to you. But when we're talking about shopping, let's not just talk about food, clothing, and the occasional mustache wax. Let's talk about also shopping around for something that in this day and age can be quite necessary, especially if you are wanting to shop online, and that is actually getting an internet connection or a phone. And I've found in Italy, the services are much cheaper. However, in Portugal, I've found that they seem to be quite a bit faster. We also have to talk about the rollout for 5G. When I was living in Italy, I never had access to 5G. There was never a time where it popped up on my phone. Theoretically, the towers were supposed to be active, but I didn't have services that were active for it. But in Italy, though, you can have some services that are really, really cheap for phone. And I know there were actually a few of you who switched to the same deal that I had, because I posted about it on my Instagram stories when I found it, that it was like $5.90 per month, and it was like 100 gigabytes plus like unlimited minutes and maybe 200 SMS. €5.90 per month. Pretty crazy to think about. But when it came to internet, like for the home, I had a weird situation where the price would fluctuate, even though I was supposed to have a set price. So we could say that my internet was probably about $28 per month. But here in Portugal, I have found that it does seem as though services can be faster. You will have to pay for it, though. And also, the data caps here in Portugal can be quite small when you're comparing to what you can find in Italy. Sometimes we're talking about 1 gigabyte, 3 gigabytes, 6 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes, 15 if you're lucky. If you want to find something that's somewhat equivalent to, like, say, the same 100 gigabytes that I had in Italy, I would have to pay for an unlimited plan here. And so instead of paying $5.90 per month, or say you go with Iliad and that's like what, $7.90, $9.90 per month, here I have a package, so I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head, but let's say it's probably around 35 to 40 euros per month that I would have to pay, because I would have to pay for unlimited everything. Otherwise, I would be limited to 20 gigabytes, and I can run through 20 gigabytes very quickly because of the type of work that I do. So I need to have a little bit more than that on my plan. 100, that's fine. It's very comfortable. I would never really go above that. But 20, yeah, I can definitely get through that very quickly. But when we're talking about like a home line, it's probably not going to cost that much more. Like maybe we'll be talking about 30 to 40 euros. So it will be more than what you might find in Italy, because I think you can even find plans that are like 21 euros for a home internet plan. It really depends, because there's always offers available. And even in Portugal, you can always find all these different offers for all these different speeds. But the speed here, I would say, the mobile speed that I have on my phone was faster than the landline that I had in Italy. I was very happy with it. But when I got here and I did a speed test, I was shocked at how much faster it was. I did do a test comparing 5G and 4G in my area, and 4G actually was a bit faster than 5G. So I can't say at this moment in time for me wasting that extra battery power really makes any difference or any sense. So I'll just stick with 4G and keep the extra bit of juice in the battery in my phone for now. Another thing, though, that is in a completely different direction from shopping is the quality of life that you experience. And I would say in many ways, you can experience a very parallel kind of quality of life. Will it be different? Absolutely. These are very different countries. I know there are some people out there that seem to have the idea that Southern Europe, a lot of these countries are the same, if at least not quite similar. And yeah, there are aspects of the lifestyle that are similar. But even when you compare the Portuguese and the Spanish, we're talking about major difference in the people, like huge difference. And also when we're talking about Italians, definitely, are there some threads that tie these peoples together? Yeah. I mean, we see an influence that has carried out probably, I would even go as far back as blaming potentially the Romans. I mean, they did spread out through a lot of this part of the world, but that's a different discussion for a different day. But going in a completely different direction, let's talk about the weather. That is something that I will say, Northern Portugal in comparison with Northern Italy, like Northern Italy can just be so much more bitter cold than Northern Portugal. Yeah, there are cold parts of Northern Portugal, and you will hear some people from here in Portugal complaining about how cold and wet and rainy it can be. But coming from the northwest of the US, it's like, okay, big deal. Like, this ain't that bad. Although in Northern Italy, there are times that I've experienced that it can just get bitter cold, icy. I mean, even in Merano, we had snow and ice and all those kinds of things. And I know people who were even further north who had like quite a bit of snow. But even when I was in Rovigo, or even other places that I've been in the north in winter, if you didn't wear like layers, you would get very, very cold there. But here, I don't feel the same necessity for all the same layers that I used to wear in Italy, let alone often having to have my jacket closed. There's plenty of times I've been able to have my jacket wide open and have been very comfortable. In Italy, you do have a much broader spectrum of the types of places that you can find. I mean, you even have a desert in Italy. Like, you have the sea, you have the mountains, you have the beaches, you have the lakes and the rivers and the plains and the fields and the valleys and the everything there. You have almost any type of landscape, all accessible. And even if you remember the episode that I did with Mattia Morelli talking about the area where he's from in Italy, I mean, you can go skiing in the morning and then have lunch on the beach in the afternoon, even go for a little dip. I mean, there aren't many places on earth where you can do that. I mean, even in Sicily, there are places where you can go and have like a nice wintry morning and then go down to the beach in the afternoon. You find these things in Italy. It's also, when we're talking about size, we're not talking about places that are huge. I think Italy is roughly the size of California, but Portugal, much smaller. And so you do have a lot of things that are really accessible here, but not as much of a wide range. Yeah, there are places, though, where you could go up to the mountains and have some snow, or you could have some more dry areas, but not necessarily like a desert. Not that the desert in Italy is huge either, but there doesn't seem to be as much wide variation in the types of landscape and weather that you will experience. But definitely you will notice a north-south divide when it comes to temperatures, that it'll often be cool in the north when it'll be hot in the south, but you also have a ton of beaches here. Italy has a ton of beaches. But in Italy, also one thing that I've noticed with a lot of beaches is that they're not all sandy beaches. A lot of them are quite rocky. But in Portugal, I've noticed more sand at the beaches. Not that I've been in a long time. And also, like in Italy, like if you're down in Sicily, you have different types of beaches than you would have in the northern part of Italy, whereas in Portugal, you have different types of beaches in the Algarve than you would up by Matosinhos or by Porto, like the northern part of the country, especially because like on the west coast of Portugal, that's just straight Atlantic there. Whereas on the southern coast, yes, it's still the Atlantic, but the water isn't necessarily as rough. I mean, I can think of many more people who would think of Portugal as a place to come and surf rather than Italy, at least amongst the surfers who I've known and have spoken to over the years. Even around the time of my move here to Portugal, I ended up speaking to someone, I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, and their first thing was like, man, Portugal, there's great surf there. That was the first thing he said. It's like, man, you've gone to a great country for surf, but that's how it goes. Anyway, I think this is where I'm going to round out this episode. So thank you all so very much for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter on another Friday night. And of course, a huge thank you to all the patrons who help to make these episodes possible through rafaeldefuria.com/Patreon, or the one-time donations to rafaeldefuria.com/support, or the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more, shop.rafaeldefuria.com. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael de Furia. Thank you so much for joining me on another Friday night. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see you all next time. Later.